Hey, this is Jimmy from Cascade Components. Today we're going to do an install video for the Hightower LT link. This is for the V2 Hightower. So first things first, let's dive right in. You're going to want to pop your rear wheel off. Lock out the rear derailleur, makes it easier to drop the wheel. Loosen the axle, pull that guy out. Drop the wheel right out. All right, so now that we got the wheel out of the way, we are going to go ahead and remove the pivot axle for the chainstay pivot on the stock lower link. So to do that, we're going to want to grab our 5mm Allen key, loosen up this M6 right here. This is the bit that holds the collet axle in place. Holds the collet axle tight. So sometimes these little conical wedge pieces that push out on the collet portion of the axle don't want to come out. To get those out, you just want to take your 6mm Allen wrench. There's a hex on the inside of it. Pop that in and just give it a light little twist and it'll come right out. So to get the pivot axle out, you take your 8mm. Sometimes these guys can be a little tight. It's easiest if you kind of brace against the chainstay. Get that guy loose. Allen wrench gets pretty close to the chainstay here. So, as you're loosening it, just watch the end, make sure you don't drag your Allen wrench through the paint. Give it a nice long scratch. You don't want that. Let's get this guy loose. All right, there's your chainstay pivot axle. That guy over there on a rag. So this is just a little trick that makes it a lot easier to work on the thing. Just take a strap. This happens to be a ski strap. Put that around the seat stay. The spacers are going to fall out, so I'm going to grab those real quick. Come on. Got the spacers out, just hook this up on the bike stand right there. That holds your whole rear triangle up and out of the way, so it's much easier to get to stuff. So this is another thing you always want to remember. Before you loosen or take out the main pivot axle for the stock link, you want to break loose the shock bolt. If you don't break loose the shock bolt ahead of time, it is much harder to get it out. So go ahead and get that guy loose. Now, I don't take this one out all the way quite yet, and the reason for that is that when you're taking the main pivot out, sometimes the lower link will want to just drop down suddenly, or you'll accidentally hit it, push it down, and then you gouge your paint, gouge your frame, which it's not the end of the world, but again, avoid it if you can, obviously. Why not? So yeah, go right ahead with the main pivot. Again, it's the 5mm Allen wrench to loosen up that M6 there. Pull that guy out. Again, the conical washer doesn't pop out, so just pop it loose with the 6mm and grab 8mm Allen wrench for the pivot axle itself. So now that we've got those loosened, I'm going to go ahead and pull the shock bolt all the way out. Make sure you don't lose your flip chip, even though you don't reuse that. Don't want to lose it. Sometimes these guys are tricky and they don't want to come out. There we go. There is the stock link removed. So we've got stock link, and then here is the red Hightower LT link we're going to install in just a second. We've been getting a lot of questions about weight for these guys. Weight's very similar. I would not get too caught up in it. Stock link measures about 330 grams even. Our link measures 300 grams, give or take a little, you know, depending on how much grease is in your link. But hair lighter, not that it's super important. I would not get caught up in it. All right, so I'm gonna dive into installing the new link. The first thing you're gonna want to do, and this is just to it helps keep grit out away from the bearings, which actually it's not for bearing wear. It's for the wear on these guys, the bearing shields and spacers. If you get too much grit in there, they start to wear down, like you can see this one has. It's, you know, not a huge deal, but better to avoid it. The bearings are sealed, so you don't actually need the grease to keep water out. So just put a nice thin layer of grease around on the inside of each of these bearing spacers. By the way, all the bearing spacers are identical on this bike, so you don't have to worry about mixing up the front and the rear when you're doing the install. And the nice thing about the grease is these stick in place when you're installing everything. You don't have to worry about them just falling out on you. So there we go. We got the bearing spacers / dust shields in place. So we're gonna go and pop this guy into the frame. By the way, your pivot axle should have a thin film of grease on it. This one already does, so I'm not reapplying any. You don't have to go overboard with it, just a thin film. So we'll slide that guy right in. Pivot axle through there. Grab the 8mm Allen wrench again. Tighten that guy up. The torque spec on this is 20 Newton meters, by the way. But as with disassembling it, I'm going to pop the shock bolt in first, just to be safe. Torque spec for the shock bolt is 16 Newton meters. Just for the purpose of illustration, we're going to keep this quick and not break out the torque wrench right now. Same with this guy, not going to break out the torque wrench right this moment. We're going to pop in the that conical washer. Just put a thin film of grease on that guy. These ones you don't have to go overboard with. It's 9 Newton meters. Now we're going to go ahead and install the rear pivot. So again, you want to take your 2 bearing spacers, apply a layer of grease around the inside, then pop those guys in place. All right, so now we're gonna go and remove the strap so we can swing the rear triangle down. Make sure the chain doesn't get caught in between the rear triangle and the link or front of the frame. Slide in this pivot axle. Snug this guy up, which again, same torque spec as the front, 20 Newton meters. So one thing important when you're doing this installation, you do want to keep that order, front pivot, shock bolt, and then chainstay pivot last. The reason for that is that the shock bolt is quite hard to get to. As you can see, with the ball end of the Allen wrench you can, with standard Allen wrench end you cannot. So obviously you can't get it very tight with the ball end, so you want to make sure that you do shock bolt before you put the chainstay pivot in. Otherwise you're going to have a really, really hard time getting that tight enough. All right, so I'm gonna put that thin layer of grease on the conical washer for chainstay pivot. Pop that guy in. This one again is 9 Newton meters. Strap out of here. You don't want a strap flapping around on your bike. And last but not least, pop the rear wheel in there. By the way, with these DT Swiss levers, if you're riding long descents that are kind of chunky and really bouncy, angle those guys backwards. Mid-race stage, because I had mine angled forwards, I had the axle loosen itself and come off. So yeah, you don't want to avoid that. If it's angled forwards, the weight of the axle will slowly loosen it, because you're taking that weight. It's not a lot of weight, but it is weight, and you're bouncing it downwards. So there you go. Release the derailleur. We're already in the right gear. Just spin it to make sure we're good to go. There you have it.